The gleaming kitchen of my three-star Michelin restaurant feels like a fortress today. Through the front window, I can see her, Lisa, my former stepmom, trying desperately to get a table. Her designer clothes don't look so designer anymore, and her face has that pinched look of someone who hasn't eaten well in days. Funny how life works out sometimes. The hostess will tell her what she tells her every time. "I'm sorry, we're fully booked." Watching her, I can still taste that spoiled milk from 15 years ago, feel it curdling on my tongue, burning my throat as she forced me to swallow every last drop. I was 12 then, sitting at our kitchen table after school, stomach growling so loud it echoed off the walls. I hadn't eaten since the day before, my usual punishment for whatever imaginary offense Lisa had dreamed up. The smell of fresh pizza wafted through the air as my stepsister Amy took another big bite, cheese stretching between her mouth and the slice. "Mom, Emma's staring at my food again," she whined, and Lisa's head snapped toward me like a snake spotting prey. "You're lucky to get anything at all," Lisa snarled, yanking open the fridge. She pulled out a gallon of milk that had been sitting there for weeks. I can still see the expiration date, March 3rd. It was nearly April. The chunks floating in the liquid made my stomach turn even before she slammed it down in front of me. "You're hungry? Fine. Drink." I tried to push it away, but her hand clamped down on the back of my neck. "Every drop," she hissed, "or you'll get nothing for a week." Amy watched with a smirk, taking another bite of pizza. My dad was at work, like always. He was always at work, blind to what happened in his own home. Or maybe he just didn't want to see. The first sip made me gag. The milk was thick, sour, with chunks that made me think of rotten teeth. Lisa's grip tightened. "Ungrateful brat. Do you know how many children would be thankful for this?" Another forced swallow. My eyes watered. Amy laughed. The room started to spin, but Lisa wouldn't let me stop. Swallow after swallow, the spoiled milk filled my stomach like poison. I didn't make it to the bathroom. The vomit came up suddenly, splashing across the kitchen floor. The sound of Amy's disgusted shriek mixed with Lisa's rage. "Look what you've done! Clean it up!" I started to get up for paper towels, but she grabbed my shirt, my only clean school shirt. "Number, use this. You want to waste food? You can wear the consequences." That night, I scrubbed my shirt in the bathroom sink, trying not to throw up again from the smell. Through the wall, I could hear Amy getting her bedtime story. Lisa's voice sweet as honey when she talked to her real daughter. I hung my wet shirt over the shower rod, knowing it wouldn't be dry by morning, knowing I'd get in trouble at school for wearing a dirty uniform, knowing Lisa would find some way to blame me for that too. Standing here now in my pristine kitchen, adjusting my crisp chef's coat, I can hardly believe that terrified 12-year-old survived. But she did more than survive. That growling stomach, those nights of hunger, they taught me about food in ways culinary school never could. Every dish that leaves my kitchen is perfect because I know what it means to be truly hungry. Every plate is a victory over those endless nights when my stomach felt like it was eating itself. The hostess catches my eye, gesturing toward Lisa, still arguing at the front desk. I give a small shake of my head. No exceptions. Not today, not ever. Through the window, I watch her face crumple as she's turned away again. Her designer bag is a knockoff, I can tell from here. Her clothes have that worn look of something bought in better times. Karma, they say, is a patient cook, and revenge? Revenge is a dish best served at a 3-star Michelin restaurant while your abusers watch through the window, their stomachs growling. Those early days after Dad married Lisa promised something like happiness. I remember the wedding. Lisa in white, Dad beaming, 7-year-old Amy throwing flower petals like tiny stars. "We're going to be sisters," Amy had squealed, hugging me tight. I hugged back, desperate to believe in this new family. I was 10, still raw from losing Mom to cancer, but hope bloomed in my chest like spring flowers. How quickly those flowers would wilt. The changes came slowly at first, like poison dripping into clear water. New clothes would appear in Amy's closet while I wore the same fading shirts. "Your father and I need to be careful with money," Lisa would say, smoothing Amy's new dress. "You understand, don't you, Emma? You're so mature for your age." But there was always money for Amy's dance classes, Amy's school trips, Amy's special treats. My belongings started disappearing one by one. First, it was small things, hair clips, colored pencils, the bookmark Mom gave me before she died. When I asked about them, Lisa's eyes would widen in fake concern. "You must have lost them, sweetie. You really should be more careful with your things." But then bigger items vanished. My winter coat just before snow season, my school backpack right before term started, even the locket with Mom's picture inside. "Maybe if you kept your room cleaner, you wouldn't lose things," Lisa would say, while Amy wore my missing sweater right in front of me. Dad never noticed. He was working longer hours at the accounting firm, chasing a promotion that would give us the life we deserve, though I was starting to understand that "we" didn't include me. The chores piled up like autumn leaves. Every morning before school, vacuum the living room, wipe down the kitchen counters, make everyone's beds. After school, dishes, laundry, dusting, mopping. "You need to earn your keep," Lisa would say, while Amy sprawled on the couch watching TV. If I missed a spot or took too long, dinner would be delayed, Lisa's favorite way of saying I wouldn't eat that night. "Emma's so helpful around the house," Lisa would gush when Dad came home late. "Such a good girl." Her words dripped with honey, but her eyes were sharp as knives. I learned to read the warnings in those eyes. One wrong word from me, one complaint to Dad, and the punishment would be worse than hunger, much worse. The food games became her favorite torture. Fresh lasagna for them, dried out leftovers for me. Hot, fresh-baked cookies that I had to watch Amy eat while doing homework. The smell of roast chicken filling the house while my stomach cramped around plain rice. "You're lucky to have anything," became her mantra, usually whispered when Dad wasn't around to hear. Some children have nothing at all. I started hiding granola bars in my room, tucking them under the mattress like precious gems. Amy found them during one of her treasure hunts, Lisa's name for letting her snoop through my things. "Mom, Emma's hoarding food like a rat." The punishment was no dinner for a week, and Lisa installed a lock on the pantry door. "It's for your own good," she told Dad. "The counselor says this kind of behavior is common in children with eating disorders." The lies about my eating disorder grew like weeds, choking out the truth. Every time I tried to tell Dad what was really happening, Lisa had already planted her seeds of doubt. "She's been so troubled since her mother died," she'd say, fake tears in her eyes. "We're doing everything we can to help her." Dad would pat her hand, thank her for being so understanding, while I sat there watching my voice die in my throat. Weekends were the worst. Without school to escape to, I was trapped in Lisa's web of endless chores and mind games. "Clean the bathroom," she'd order, and when I finished, "No, not like that. Do it again." Again and again until my hands were raw from scrubbing. Meanwhile, Amy's laughter would float up from the backyard where she played with her friends. Friends I wasn't allowed to see because I was grounded for whatever imaginary offense Lisa had invented that week. The breaking point wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 tiny cuts bleeding me dry. It was Amy wearing my mom's locket to school and losing it. It was Lisa telling the neighbors I was troubled when they asked why I never played outside anymore. It was Dad's growing distance, the way his eyes slid past me at dinner like I was already gone. It was the hunger, always the hunger, gnawing at my insides like a living thing. I learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to swallow my words along with my hunger. I learned to move through the house like a ghost, doing my chores without a sound, hoping that if I was perfect enough, quiet enough, good enough, something would change. But nothing changed. Lisa's smile just got sweeter, her lies more elaborate, her punishments more creative, and Amy watched and learned, becoming a mirror of her mother's cruelty. A princess in their twisted fairy tale where I was the servant girl without a fairy godmother in sight. But fairy tales don't tell you what happens to the servant girl when she stops believing in magic. They don't tell you how hunger can sharpen your mind like a knife, how hatred can keep you warm on the coldest nights, how revenge can taste sweeter than any food. Standing in my spotless kitchen now, watching Lisa and Amy skulk away from my restaurant again, I know the real fairy tale ending. Sometimes the servant girl doesn't need a prince or a fairy godmother. Sometimes she just needs to survive long enough to write her own ending. The hunger became my constant companion, a hollow ache that followed me through endless days. Lisa got creative with her food restrictions, turning meals into a twisted game. "If you can finish your homework in 30 minutes, you can have dinner," she'd say, knowing the math assignment would take at least an hour. Or, "Since you didn't dust the top of the refrigerator, no breakfast tomorrow." Amy would watch these proclamations with gleaming eyes, learning how to wield food like a weapon. I got sneakier about hiding food. Not in my room anymore. That was too obvious. I hollowed out an old science textbook, stashing granola bars between the chapters on photosynthesis and cell division. I volunteered to take out the trash so I could grab discarded apples from Amy's lunchbox. I made friends with lunch ladies at school who would slip me extra portions, believing Lisa's story about my eating disorder, but kind enough to break the rules anyway. But Lisa was always one step ahead. She searched my backpack daily, checked my pockets before putting clothes in the wash. The day she found my textbook hiding spot was the day everything got worse. I came home from school to find my science book in shreds on the kitchen table, granola bar wrappers arranged in a neat pile like evidence at a trial. "Stealing food again," she said, voice soft with fake concern. "What are we going to do with you, Emma?" The spoiled milk incident wasn't a one-time thing. It became her favorite punishment, a special torture saved for when I was caught with food. That day, she'd been saving the milk for 2 weeks, letting it curdle in the garage fridge. "Since you're so hungry all the time," she said, pouring the chunky liquid into a glass. "Drink up." The smell alone made my stomach heave, but her hand was firm on the back of my neck, forcing my head back. "Every drop, or I'll tell your father you're stealing again." I tried to drink it slowly, to breathe through my mouth, but the taste, God, the taste, like death and rot and something worse. Amy recorded it on her phone, giggling. "This is so going on Instagram," she said, but Lisa stopped her. "No, sweetie. You know we have to protect Emma's privacy. The school counselor says it's important." But I saw them watching the video later, heads bent together over Amy's phone, laughing. The vomiting started before I could finish the glass. It came in waves, violent and unstoppable. Lisa made me clean it up with my school uniform again, then sent me to my room without letting me change. "Maybe this will teach you not to steal," she called after me. I spent the night shivering in my soiled clothes, the smell of spoiled milk and vomit making me sick again and again. School became both escape and prison. Teachers watched me during lunch, taking notes to send home to Lisa. "We are all very concerned about your eating habits," my English teacher said one day, pulling me aside. I wanted to scream the truth, that Lisa was starving me, that the real eating disorder was being forced to vomit up spoiled milk, that I was hungry, so hungry, all the time. But who would believe me? Lisa had spent years crafting her concerned stepmother act. The school counselor's office became a weekly torture chamber. "Your stepmother tells me you're hiding food again," Mrs. Peterson would say, her voice gentle but her eyes full of judgment. "Emma, we can't help you if you don't admit you have a problem." Every session was another brick in the wall Lisa was building around me, trapping me in her narrative of the troubled, food-obsessed stepdaughter. My grades started slipping. It's hard to focus on algebra when your stomach feels like it's eating itself. Hard to remember dates in history when you're dizzy from hunger. Hard to care about grammar when you're counting the minutes until lunch, knowing Lisa had probably called ahead to restrict my portions again. "She's not allowed second helpings," I once overheard the cafeteria worker say. "Doctor's orders." The worst part wasn't the hunger. It was the isolation. Lisa had crafted her web so perfectly that everyone believed her version of events. The teachers, the counselor, even Dad. Especially Dad. He'd come home late, kiss Lisa on the cheek, ruffle Amy's hair, and look right through me like I was already gone. When report cards came, he'd sigh and say, "Maybe you should try harder, Emma." Look at Amy's grades. Never mind that Amy had tutors, proper meals, and a mother who didn't force her to stay up late cleaning bathrooms. One night, after a particularly bad day of forced milk drinking and vomiting, I heard them talking in their bedroom. "I'm worried about Emma," Lisa said, her voice thick with fake tears. The therapist says this kind of behavior, the food stealing, the lying, it could be related to losing her mother. Maybe we should consider residential treatment. My blood turned to ice. I'd heard about those places where they sent troubled kids, places where Lisa's control would be absolute, where no one would hear me scream. That night, I started planning my escape. Not yet. I was too young, had no money, no place to go. But someday. I wrote it on a scrap of paper and ate it like a promise. Someday I'll get out. Someday they'll pay. Someday I'll be free. The paper turned to pulp in my mouth, but the words burned in my heart like fire. Let Lisa play her games. Let Amy record her videos. Let Dad look through me like glass. I would survive. I would escape. And when I did, they would learn what real hunger felt like. Life became a carefully orchestrated ballet of lies, not my lies, but Lisa's. She crafted them with surgical precision, each story building on the last until the school had a complete file documenting my eating disorder. I discovered this during a mandatory meeting with the school counselor, catching glimpses of notes in my file. Mother reports food hoarding, episodes of binge eating followed by guilt, possible bulimia. Emma. Mrs. Peterson leaned forward in her chair, hands clasped on her desk. Your stepmother is very worried about you. She says you've been stealing food again. The irony burned like acid in my throat. I was stealing food because I was starving, but in Lisa's twisted narrative, I was starving myself. The perfect trap. Any attempt to feed myself became evidence of my disorder. The therapy sessions were a special kind of torture. Every Wednesday after school, I'd sit in Dr. Martinez's office, surrounded by motivational posters and fake plants, while she tried to get me to open up about my issues with food. How could I explain that my only issue was systematic starvation? That my stepmother was using these sessions to cover her tracks? That every time I tried to tell the truth, Lisa had already poisoned the well with her concerned parent act? Your father tells me you've been acting out at home, Dr. Martinez would say, scribbling in her notebook. Refusing to eat family meals, hiding food in your room. These are serious red flags, Emma. I wanted to scream that I wasn't refusing meals. I wasn't being offered them. That the food I hid was because I was hungry, desperately hungry, all the time. But Lisa had thought of everything. Any protest I made fit neatly into her narrative of denial and rebellion. My grades plummeted like stones in a well. How could they not? I spent my nights cleaning until my hands were raw, then tried to do homework with a brain fuzzy from hunger. Teachers sent concerned emails home about my lack of focus and declining performance. Lisa would show these to Dad, shaking her head sadly. We're doing everything we can, she'd say, while Amy sat smugly at the kitchen table working with her private tutor. The school started monitoring my lunch periods like I was under surveillance. Teachers would casually sit near me in the cafeteria, taking notes on their phones. The lunch ladies had strict instructions about my portions. No seconds, no desserts. Everything carefully measured and reported back to Lisa. My friends started avoiding me at lunch, uncomfortable with the constant adult supervision. Not that I had many friends left. Lisa had made sure of that too. Emma's going through a difficult phase, she'd tell other parents, her voice dripping with fake concern. We think it's best if she focuses on her recovery right now. One by one, birthday party invitations stopped coming. Sleepovers were out of the question. Even study groups were discouraged. Can't have me stealing food from other people's houses, after all. The isolation was calculated and complete. At school, I was the girl with the eating disorder, the one everyone watched but no one talked to. At home, I was the ghost in the corner, visible only when there were chores to be done or punishments to be handed out. Amy thrived in the spotlight of Lisa's attention, her grades perfect, her social calendar full, her plate always piled high with food I wasn't allowed to touch. One day, during a particularly brutal therapy session, I finally broke. "She's starving me," I sobbed, the words bursting out like water through a cracked dam. "Lisa doesn't feed me. The food hiding, the stealing, it's because I'm hungry. Please, please, believe me." Dr. Martinez's face softened with what looked like genuine concern, and for a moment I thought someone would finally listen. but Lisa had planned for this too. In our next family session, she brought a detailed food diary, photos of fully stocked pantries, receipts from grocery stores. "We're at our wits' end," she said, dabbing at fake tears. "Emma's delusions are getting worse. She's not just hiding food anymore. Now she's creating these elaborate fantasies about being starved." Dad put his arm around her shoulders while Amy nodded solemnly beside them, the perfect picture of a concerned family. That night, my punishment was worse than spoiled milk. Lisa cleaned out my room while I was at school, removing everything except my mattress and a single change of clothes. "Since you're telling people we starve you," she said, her voice cold as winter, "let's see how you like having nothing at all." For 2 weeks, I slept on a bare mattress, did homework on the floor, and wore the same clothes until they stank. When anyone asked, Lisa would smile sadly and say, "The therapist suggested removing triggers from her environment." The school year dragged on like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every meal became a performance, every bite documented and analyzed. Teachers started sending me to the nurse's office to be weighed, the numbers carefully recorded and sent home to Lisa. My body became public property, subject to endless discussion and scrutiny while the real abuse continued behind closed doors. And through it all, Lisa smiled her perfect smile, played her perfect role, and tightened the noose around my neck, one concerned report at a time. The day I discovered my college fund had been drained was the day my world finally shattered completely. I was searching for my birth certificate in Dad's home office, planning ahead for college applications, when I found the bank statements. Years of savings, money Mom had set aside before she died, all of it gone. Transferred to a different account, Amy's account. My hands shook as I read the transfer details. The date matched perfectly with Amy's sweet 16 present, a brand new car wrapped in a giant red bow. The car she drove to school every day while I took the bus. The car she bragged about constantly, claiming her mom and dad had saved up specially for it. My college money had bought Amy a BMW while I was planning to apply for scholarships and loans. "What are you doing in here?" Lisa's voice cracked like a whip behind me. I spun around, papers clutched in my trembling hands. For once, I didn't back down. "You stole my college fund," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Mom's money." "You took it for Amy's car." Lisa's face didn't even flicker with guilt. Instead, she smiled, that same cold smile I'd grown to hate. "Your father and I decided Amy needed it more. After all, with your grades, what college would want you?" The fight that followed was nuclear. I found my voice, years of pent-up rage finally exploding. I screamed about the starvation, the spoiled milk, the endless chores, the lies to the school. Lisa stood there, taking it all in with that infuriating smile, until Dad came home early from work. Then the tears started. Not mine. Hers. "She's having another episode," Lisa sobbed into Dad's shoulder. "She broke into your office, started raving about us stealing from her. The therapist warned us her delusions might get worse." Dad looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. But all he saw was what Lisa wanted him to see. A troubled teenager, a problem child, a burden. "Emma," he said, his voice tired and distant, "we've done everything we can to help you. The therapy, the counseling, the special meal plans. But if you're going to break into my office and accuse Lisa of stealing..." He trailed off, rubbing his face. "Maybe Lisa's right. Maybe we need to consider residential treatment." Something broke inside me then. Not like glass shattering, but like ice melting, cold and quiet and final. I looked at my father, this man who had once been my hero, and saw a stranger, a weak man who chose his new wife's lies over his own daughter's truth. "Everything she's told you is a lie," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Every single thing." I laid it all out, years of systematic abuse documented in the papers I'd secretly kept. Photos of my empty room, screenshots of Amy's cruel texts, recordings of Lisa's threats when Dad wasn't around. I had been gathering evidence for years, hiding it at school, waiting for the right moment. This was it, my last stand. But I had underestimated Lisa's hold on my father. She wept harder, claiming I had falsified everything. "See how elaborate her delusions have become?" she cried. "The doctors said this might happen, that she might start manufacturing evidence to support her fantasies." And Dad, weak, blind Dad, nodded along. "I think you should go to your room," he said finally. "We'll discuss your punishment for breaking into my office tomorrow." Not a word about the evidence, not a question about the abuse, not even a glimmer of doubt about Lisa's tears. Just another dismissal, another betrayal, another nail in the coffin of our relationship. I walked out of that office knowing I would never trust him again. The dad who had taught me to ride a bike, who had held me through Mom's funeral, who had promised to always protect me. That man was gone. In his place was Lisa's puppet, too weak or too blind to see the truth that was right in front of him. That night, I didn't go to my bare room with its stripped mattress. Instead, I packed a bag with the few things I had left: some clothes, my secret stash of documents, Mom's old recipe book that I'd managed to hide from Lisa's purges. The house was quiet except for the sound of Amy watching TV downstairs. Lisa's fake sobs still coming from Dad's office. I wrote a note, short and final. "Everything I told you was true. Someday you'll realize that, but I won't be here when you do." I left it on my bare mattress, knowing Lisa would probably intercept it before Dad ever saw it. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing here mattered anymore. Walking out that door was the hardest and easiest thing I'd ever done. Hard because I was leaving everything I'd ever known. Easy because I had nothing left to lose. I had $73 saved up, a bag of clothes, and no idea where I was going. But anywhere was better than here. Anywhere was better than watching my father choose Lisa's lies over my truth one more time. The night air was cold on my face as I walked away from the house that had become my prison. Behind me, through the windows, I could see Lisa comforting Dad, probably already spinning my departure into another symptom of my illness. Let her spin. Let her lie. I was done being her victim, done being the troubled stepdaughter in her perfect family narrative, done being hungry. The first night of freedom was the coldest I'd ever been, huddled in a 24-hour McDonald's until dawn. But that first meal I bought myself, a Big Mac and fries, tasted better than any 5-star dinner. No one watching, no one counting bites, no one taking it away. Just me and my food, tears mixing with ketchup as I savored every single bite. The women's shelter took me in after I explained my situation. "You're not the first," the intake worker said, her eyes kind but tired. "And sadly, you won't be the last." My roommate was a girl named Maria who'd escaped her own stepmother's abuse. We stayed up late sharing stories, finding bitter comfort in how similar our experiences were. "At least you got out," she told me. "Some never do." I got my first restaurant job the next day, washing dishes at a diner near the shelter. The owner, Mike, didn't ask too many questions when I said I needed cash payments. He just handed me an apron and pointed to the mountain of dirty plates. "Get through those and we'll talk about regular hours." I worked until my hands were raw, but every blister felt like freedom. The kitchen became my sanctuary. After my shift, Mike would let me eat whatever was left over. Real food, hot food, as much as I wanted. Sometimes he'd teach me little things: how to chop onions properly, the secret to perfect pancakes, ways to make cheap ingredients taste expensive. "You've got good instincts," he'd say, watching me experiment with spices. "Hunger makes the best chefs." I worked every hour I could get, picking up shifts at 2 more restaurants. Breakfast shift at the diner, lunch at a cafe downtown, dinner at a Chinese place where I learned to work a wok. 3 jobs, 18 hours a day, falling into bed at the shelter too tired to dream. But for the first time in years, I was eating regularly. The hollow feeling in my stomach started to fade, replaced by something like hope. The other cooks took me under their wing, teaching me their secrets. Jorge at the cafe showed me how to make sauces that could make cardboard taste good. Mrs. Chen at the Chinese restaurant taught me about balance: sweet, sour, salty, bitter. Mike kept giving me more responsibilities at the diner, letting me prep, then cook, then create specials. I saved every penny that didn't go to food or basic necessities. No new clothes, no phone, nothing extra. Every night, I counted my money twice, hiding it in different places around my shelter bed. Sometimes I'd wake up in a panic, thinking Lisa had found it, had taken it like she'd taken my college fund. But it was always there, growing slowly but surely. The turning point came 6 months after I left home. A famous chef was doing a pop-up restaurant in town, and all the local cooks were talking about it. They're looking for prep cooks, Jorge told me. 3 days' work, crazy hours, but good money. I applied, not expecting anything. To my shock, they hired me. Those 3 days nearly killed me. 18-hour shifts of constant motion, precision knife work, hundreds of identical plates that had to be perfect. The head chef, Marcus, was a screamer who made Lisa look gentle, but when he tasted my sauce, a simple vinaigrette I'd learned to make at the cafe, he stopped mid-yell. "Who made this?" he demanded. When I raised my hand, shaking, he stared at me for a long moment. "How old are you? Where did you train?" The questions came rapid fire, and I told him the truth. 18, no training, just work at local restaurants. He shook his head in disbelief. "You have a natural palate, raw talent, but you need proper training." That night, he offered me a job at his restaurant in the city. Prep cook, minimum wage, but with the chance to learn. "It'll be harder than anything you've ever done," he warned. "Most don't last a week." I thought of Lisa's endless chores, of cleaning vomit with my clothes, of years of hunger and abuse. I smiled. "When can I start?" Saying goodbye to the shelter was hard. Maria hugged me tight, made me promise to keep in touch. Mike gave me his old knife roll, filled with basic but good quality knives. Mrs. Chin pressed a red envelope into my hand. "Lucky money," she said, "for new beginnings." The intake worker who'd first helped me smiled and said, "Remember, you can always come back if you need to." But we both knew I wouldn't. The city was huge, terrifying, and exactly what I needed. Marcus's restaurant was in a trendy neighborhood I could never afford to live in, but I found a room in a crowded apartment an hour away by bus. My roommates were all restaurant workers too, servers, line cooks, dishwashers. We barely saw each other, working opposite shifts, but there was comfort in sharing space with people who understood the life. That first year in Marcus's kitchen was like going to war. The heat, the pace, the precision required. It was brutal. I worked 16-hour days, studied cookbooks at night, practiced knife skills until my hands cramped. But for the first time in my life, the hunger driving me forward wasn't from starvation. It was ambition. Every perfect dice, every smooth sauce, every plate that met Marcus's impossible standards was a victory over my past. And every night, falling into bed with aching feet and burned fingers, I would think, "See, Lisa, I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm learning to thrive." My rise in the culinary world wasn't meteoric. It was built on burned fingers, countless cuts, and endless nights. Marcus worked me harder than anyone, but he also taught me everything. "You have something special," he'd say, watching me plate a dish. "A hunger in your cooking that can't be taught." He didn't know how right he was. The breakthrough came during a busy service when our sous chef cut himself badly and had to leave. Marcus looked around the chaotic kitchen, his eyes landing on me. "Emma, take his station." It wasn't a request. For the next 6 hours, I cooked like my life depended on it. Every dish perfect, every timing exact, running the line like I'd been born to it. When service ended, Marcus pulled me aside. "You're my new sous chef. Don't make me regret it." I was 23, the youngest sous chef in the city. The other cooks, mostly men with decades of experience, weren't happy. They tested me constantly, deliberately messing up orders, forgetting to prep ingredients. I handled it the way I'd handled Lisa's abuse, by being better, working harder, proving them wrong with every perfect plate. The food critics started noticing our restaurant. "A fresh voice in the kitchen," one wrote. "Classic dishes reimagined with startling clarity." Another praised the emotional depth of my cooking. They didn't know that every dish I created was born from years of hunger, that each plate was a story of survival. When the cooking competition was announced, Marcus insisted I enter. Regional Young Chef of the Year, a chance to showcase my own menu, my own vision. I spent weeks perfecting my dishes, each one a chapter of my story. The appetizer, a deconstructed milk soup, turned into something beautiful and pure. The main, a humble cut of meat transformed through patience and skill. The dessert, bitter chocolate made sweet through careful handling. The day of the competition, I looked out into the audience and saw Lisa and Dad. They were there to support Amy, who'd apparently started a food blog and entered the competition as an influencer. The sight of them nearly made me drop my knife, but then a strange calm settled over me. Let them watch. Let them see what their hunger had created. I cooked like I was possessed, every move precise, every flavor exactly as I'd planned. My hands didn't shake once. The judges were silent as they tasted my food, then huddled together for what felt like hours. When they announced the winner, I barely heard my name through the roaring in my ears. All I could see was Lisa's face, white with shock, as I walked past her to accept my award. The investors came calling after that. "We love your vision," they said. "Your story, your passion, it's exactly what we're looking for." They wanted to back my own restaurant, me running my own kitchen, creating my own menu. The scared, hungry girl who'd fled home with nothing would have her own empire. I threw myself into the planning. Every detail had to be perfect. The location, an old warehouse converted into a sleek, modern space. The menu, elevated comfort food, each dish a memory transformed. The name, Hunger, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is own your pain. Opening night was chaos and magic. Food critics, local celebrities, everyone who was anyone in the city's culinary scene. I worked the line myself, expediting every dish, making sure each plate was perfect. The reviews started coming in before the night was over. Extraordinary. A stunning debut. Worth the wait. One critic wrote, "Each dish tells a story, speaks of transformation. Simple ingredients elevated to art through skill and understanding. The standout, a milk-braised pork so tender it brings tears to your eyes, served with bread made from reclaimed grain. It tastes like redemption." The first Michelin star came a year later. I was in the kitchen prepping for service when my manager burst in with the news. The whole staff celebrated that night, but I kept cooking. 1 star wasn't enough. I wanted more, needed more. The hunger that Lisa had tried to break me with had become my superpower. The 2nd star followed 6 months later. "Exceptional cooking worth a detour," the guide said. My little restaurant was now one of the hottest spots in the country. Celebrities begged for tables. Food magazines wanted interviews. Television shows asked me to compete. I turned them all down. The kitchen was my stage, my food, my only statement. Through it all, I kept cooking, kept pushing, kept transforming pain into beauty on the plate. Every service was a performance, every dish a declaration. You didn't break me. You tried to starve me, but look what I became. The scared, hungry girl had become a chef who made people cry with a single bite. The 3rd star came 3 years after opening. The ultimate recognition. Exceptional cuisine, worth a special journey. Only a handful of restaurants in the country had 3 stars. The press went crazy. Everyone wanted to know my story, my inspiration, my journey. I gave them carefully edited versions, leaving out the darkest parts. But every regular at my restaurant knew the truth. It was there on every plate, in every bite. This was what happens when you try to starve someone's spirit. Sometimes they turn that hunger into art. They came to my restaurant on a busy Friday night, Lisa and Amy, dressed in clothes that had seen better days. I watched them through the kitchen window as they tried to talk their way into getting a table. "But we're family," I heard Amy whine to my host. "Tell Emma we're here. She'll want to see us." The years hadn't been kind to either of them. After Dad died of a heart attack 2 years ago, I heard about it through an old neighbor. Apparently, things had fallen apart. Lisa had never worked during her marriage, and Dad's life insurance wasn't enough to maintain their lifestyle. Amy's influencer career had fizzled out after a series of scandals involving plagiarized recipes and fake reviews. I kept cooking as I watched them argue with my staff, my hands steady as I plated a delicate arrangement of herbs over perfectly seared scallops. Through the window, I could see Lisa pulling out her phone, probably to show pictures proving their connection to me. My host, Maria, the same Maria from the shelter who was now my front-of-house manager, handled them exactly as I'd instructed. "I'm sorry, but Chef Emma's restaurant is fully booked for the next 6 months. We can add you to the waiting list, but we cannot guarantee a table." Her voice was professional, practiced, perfect. Lisa's face turned red with rage, a familiar sight that no longer held any power over me. "Do you know who I am?" Lisa's voice carried through to the kitchen. "I raised her. I'm her mother." Several of my cooks looked up, knowing my story, ready to intervene if needed. I shook my head slightly. Let them play out their scene. The kitchen was my domain now, and they held no power here. Amy tried a different approach, pushing past Lisa with tears in her eyes. "Please, Emma's my sister. We grew up together. We're starving. We haven't eaten a proper meal in months." The irony of her words wasn't lost on anyone who knew my story. My sous chef actually snorted as he heard this, earning a sharp look from me. We had standards to maintain, regardless of the drama unfolding in our lobby. I kept working, executing each dish with precision while Lisa and Amy's voices grew louder. Through the years, they'd tried everything to get into my restaurant. Fake names, fake reservations, even trying to bribe my staff. Each time, they were turned away. Each time, they came back more desperate. "Your father would be ashamed of you." Lisa's final shot, aimed to wound. But Dad had made his choice years ago, choosing her lies over my truth. His shame meant nothing to me now. I garnished a plate of my signature milk-braised pork, a dish that food critics called hauntingly beautiful, without knowing its bitter inspiration. Maria finally had security escort them out, their protests echoing through the dining room. Some of my regular customers recognized them from previous attempts, shaking their heads in sympathy. Not for Lisa and Amy, but for me. My restaurant had become my fortress, my kitchen, my kingdom. Their siege would never breach these walls. Later that night, after service, Maria brought me their latest letter. They always left one, full of guilt and manipulation. This one was particularly desperate. "We're living in a tiny apartment now. Amy can't find work. We've been following your success, seeing your name everywhere. How can you let your family suffer while you have so much? After everything we did for you?" I read it in my office, surrounded by my awards, my Michelin stars gleaming on the wall. The letter joined hundreds of others in a special file I kept, evidence of their attempts, their lies, their manipulation. Sometimes I read them before service, letting their words fuel my creativity. Pain into plates, suffering into sustenance. The next morning, I received a notification that they'd posted another review online. 1 star, of course. "Chef is cruel and heartless. Refuses to help family in need. Food probably terrible, but we wouldn't know since she won't let us eat there." It joined dozens of similar reviews, all easily identified and removed by my PR team. Amy had also posted on her failing food blog, "My sister, the famous chef who let us starve." The irony was almost poetic. Her post told a twisted version of our childhood, casting herself as the neglected one, Lisa as the struggling mother, me as the ungrateful child who abandoned them. The comments were filled with sympathy for them, outrage at me, from people who didn't know the truth, who hadn't lived through the hunger and abuse. But for every fake review, every bitter blog post, there were hundreds of genuine ones. Critics who praised not just my food, but the emotion behind it. Customers who wrote about crying over my dishes, feeling something deep and true in every bite. My regulars who defended me online, who knew pieces of my story and understood that every perfect plate was an act of defiance. I looked at their letter one last time before feeding it through my shredder. Let them hunger. Let them know what it feels like to watch others eat while their stomachs growl. Let them understand what they put me through, one denied reservation at a time. My revenge wasn't in cruelty. It was in success, in creating beauty from pain, in transforming their abuse into art that the whole world celebrated. In my kitchen, I was no longer their victim. I was a chef, an artist, a survivor. And every night, I turned hunger into healing, one plate at a time. The sweet taste of success became sweeter each time Lisa and Amy tried and failed to get into my restaurant. Their attempts grew more desperate as their situation worsened. They started camping outside before opening hours, trying to corner my staff as they arrived for work. Amy would sob dramatically about being my only sister, while Lisa attempted to use her old manipulative tactics on my employees. "Just tell Emma we're here," she'd plead, using that honeyed voice I remembered so well. "We've changed. We just want to make things right." But my staff knew better. Many of them were survivors themselves. I had a habit of hiring people who understood hunger, who knew what it meant to fight their way up from nothing. They were immune to Lisa's act. Their social media campaign against me intensified. Amy started a YouTube channel dedicated to exposing me, filled with tearful videos about her abusive sister who had abandoned her family. She'd sit in front of the camera, crying on cue, telling stories about how I'd been the troubled one, how Lisa had tried so hard to help me, how I'd stolen Dad's love from them. The comments under her videos were full of outrage, people who didn't know the truth, who fell for their act just like everyone had when I was young. "How could anyone be so cruel to their family?" they'd write. "Success has clearly gone to her head." Some even tried to organize boycotts of my restaurant. It didn't matter. We still had a 6-month waiting list. Lisa tried a different approach, contacting food magazines and critics with her version of events. "The real story behind Chef Emma's success," she'd promise, painting herself as the supportive stepmother who'd encouraged my love of cooking only to be betrayed. Most journalists saw through it, but a few bit. There were articles questioning my character, suggesting my difficult relationship with my family raised concerns about my leadership. I let my food answer their allegations. Every perfect dish that left my kitchen was a rebuttal to their lies. Critics could question my character all they wanted, but they couldn't deny the truth they tasted on their plates. My regulars remained fiercely loyal, knowing pieces of my real story, understanding that every bite of my food told the truth that Lisa and Amy tried to hide. They tried crashing private events at the restaurant, dressed in their increasingly shabby designer knockoffs. Amy would cause scenes in the lobby, screaming about family loyalty while Lisa played the grieving stepmother. After everything we did for her, she'd sob to anyone who would listen. After all the love we gave her. The security footage from these incidents went into the same file as their letters, evidence of their ongoing harassment, their desperation, their lies. Sometimes, late at night after service, I'd watch the videos, not out of pain or anger, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. Their power over me was gone, transformed into the power I now held, not through cruelty like them, but through creativity and skill. Their latest scheme was trying to get jobs at my restaurant. They submitted applications under fake names, using old photos when they'd been better off. Lisa claimed years of kitchen experience she didn't have. Amy listed herself as a social media expert, and experienced food critic. My HR team, well-versed in their tactics, spotted the deception immediately. I let them schedule interviews, knowing they'd show up hungry and hopeful. Let them wait in the lobby for hours, smelling the food they couldn't have, watching others enjoy what they couldn't taste. Let them feel what I had felt all those years, the gnawing emptiness, the desperation, the helplessness of being so close to food and unable to eat. When they finally got their rejection letters, their responses were predictably dramatic. More tearful videos, more angry posts, more attempts to smear my reputation. Amy started hanging around food blogger events, telling anyone who would listen about her famous chef sister who had forgotten her roots. Lisa tried to contact my suppliers, my investors, anyone she thought might have influence over me. But their desperation only highlighted my success. Every failed attempt to enter my world showed how far I'd risen above theirs. They were still playing the same old games while I had transformed their abuse into art, their cruelty into cuisine that made people weep with joy. The ultimate irony came when a major food magazine did a feature on me. The photographer captured me in my kitchen, confident and in control, my 3 Michelin stars visible in the background. The article praised not just my food, but my journey, my mysterious past that informed my cooking. The photos showed my success, my power, my triumph. Lisa and Amy's response was to post an old family photo online, me at 12, thin and haunted-eyed, standing apart from their smiling embrace. They meant it to support their narrative of me as the troubled child, the ungrateful sister, the cruel daughter. Instead, it showed the truth to anyone with eyes to see, a hungry child who had survived, who had transformed her pain into power, who had made her hunger into healing. Let them hunger now. Let them taste what they fed me all those years. My revenge wasn't in denying them food. It was in creating food so transcendent they would never taste it, in transforming their abuse into art they could never touch. Every night, my kitchen turned out plates of pure beauty, and every night they remained outside, hungry and wanting, finally understanding what true hunger felt like. The true victory wasn't in watching Lisa and Amy suffer. It was in what I built from the ashes of my past. 3 Michelin stars were just the beginning. I opened a foundation for abused stepchildren, providing culinary training programs and safe housing for kids escaping situations like mine. Every student came with their own hunger, their own pain, and in my kitchens, they learned to transform it into something beautiful. Maria, my friend from the shelter who became my restaurant manager, ran the foundation's day-to-day operations. "You're giving them what we never had," she told me one night, watching a group of teenagers learn knife skills in our teaching kitchen. A way out, a future. The students' eyes held that same hunger I'd once had, not just for food, but for chance to prove themselves. My restaurant became more than just a place to eat. It became a symbol of survival. People didn't just come for the food, they came for the story they could taste in every bite. Food critics wrote about the emotional depth of my dishes, the profound narrative in my tasting menus. They didn't know half of it. Every plate that left my kitchen was a page from my story, every dish a testament to survival. The foundation's first success story was a girl named Sarah who reminded me so much of myself at that age. Her stepmother had used food as a weapon, just like Lisa had. Sarah came to us hungry and angry, but in the kitchen, she found her power. Now she's my sous chef, helping other survivors learn to cook, to create, to heal. Lisa and Amy's attempts to contact me grew less frequent as the years passed. Their social media campaigns sputtered out as people lost interest in their tales of familial betrayal. The last time they tried to get into the restaurant, they looked older, tired, defeated. Amy's designer knockoffs were visibly worn, Lisa's hair showing gray at the roots. They didn't cause a scene this time. They just stood outside, watching through the windows as people enjoyed my food. I didn't feel satisfaction seeing them like that. I didn't feel anything at all. They were just 2 hungry people among many, their power over me long gone. My victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in my rise, in the lives I'd touched, in the pain I'd transformed into purpose. The foundation expanded, opening branches in other cities. Each location included a restaurant staffed by program graduates, serving food that told stories of survival and triumph. We provided not just culinary training, but therapy, education, and most importantly, a community that understood. Every student knew they weren't alone, that their hunger could become their strength. My cookbook, when it finally came out, wasn't just a collection of recipes. It was a story of transformation, each dish a chapter in my journey from hunger to healing. The dedication read simply, "For every child who went to bed hungry, your pain can become your power." It became a bestseller, not for the recipes alone, but for the truth it told about survival and redemption. The last letter I received from Lisa and Amy was different from the others. No accusations, no manipulation, just a simple request for forgiveness. I didn't respond. Some hurts go too deep for forgiveness, some hungers never fully fade. But I kept the letter, not out of anger or revenge, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. Today, standing in my kitchen, watching my students learn and grow, I finally understand that the hunger Lisa tried to break me with became my greatest gift. It taught me to create, to survive, to transform pain into beauty. Every dish I make carries that lesson, that even the deepest wounds can become works of art, that hunger can feed something greater than itself. My restaurant's waiting list is still months long. Critics still rave about every new dish. But my real achievement isn't in the stars or reviews. It's in the eyes of my students when they first create something beautiful, when they realize their pain can have purpose. It's in the quiet triumph of serving perfect plates night after night, in the knowledge that every meal we serve tells a story of survival. I don't watch for Lisa and Amy anymore. Their hunger is their own now, as mine once was. My focus is on the future, on my students, my restaurants, my foundation, on creating beauty from pain, strength from hunger, hope from despair. That's the real victory, not in revenge, but in redemption, not in making others hungry, but in teaching them to feed themselves. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't serving a cold dish. It's serving perfectly executed plates of pure beauty, night after night, while teaching others to do the same. It's in transforming hunger into an art form, pain into purpose, survival into success. And every night, in kitchens across the country, my students and I do just that, one perfect plate at a time. The hungry girl who once cleaned vomit with her clothes has become a chef who feeds not just bodies, but souls. And that, more than any star or review, is the sweetest taste of all.